When it comes to unnecessary sequels in gaming, there is a plethora to choose from. Duke Nukem Forever was a 15-year wait for nothing, Perfect Dark Zero failed to live up to its massive legacy, and Devil May Cry 2 is so bad it's barely referenced in the later games. But right up there with the best of them has to sit the king of who the hell asked for this? Dead Island Riptide. In fairness, we can't totally call Riptide a sequel. It's not quite a standalone expansion though. A sequel implies new features, improvements, and a continuation of the story. Riptide has bits and pieces of these, but none of them are really 100%. I think perhaps there is one term for what Riptide is when conventional terminology fails us. A complete friggin' mess.
Oh, fuck yeah! Rock and roll! Woo! Okay, here, take it. Take all of it.
To start with a short recap, Dead Island was a game about a bunch of genetically anomalous failures surviving a zombie outbreak on the island resort of Banoi. After doing a bunch of nonsense fetch quests, the survivors are picked up by a military escort and airlifted out of the hellscape. Riptide picks up immediately after this, revealing the military to be, shocker, evil, and the brain trust that is the player characters from the first game are taken into custody.
What the hell happened? Motherfuckers drugged us.
Once again, your options are Perna, the gun-wielding ex-cop, Logan, the over-the-hill football player, Jian, the blade expert spy, and Sam B, the rap god. One of the few additions Riptide makes is the new possible player character in the form of former soldier John, who, for some reason, specializes in fisticuffs, as evidenced by his terrible shirt. Select your reject of choice and awaken in the brig of a ship being overrun by the undead. Being a direct continuation of Dead Island, there is the option to import your save, which is what I did, or simply starting at a higher level and jumping in with a bunch of unlocked perks from the get-go. Why they did this I don't really understand, since the aim of the first few hours is still to make you feel underpowered. Something I didn't really have thanks to the bonus damage I was constantly dealing. What this did show is that the game's level scaling was a complete farce, which is actually true of pretty much any game that has level scaling. After escaping the ship, you'll wash up on another island resort, which again, shocker, is overrun by the undead. You'll need to set up a camp with the remaining survivors, venture out through the hordes of zombies, complete fetch quests, and all of this is starting to sound very, very familiar, isn't it? That's because Riptide does almost nothing new over the first game. It's not entirely true, I suppose. Now, at the climax of every chapter, you're forced into a horrible, mind-numbing defense mission where you have to set up fences and traps, watch as zombies ignore those, and then run from NPC to NPC to make sure they don't die until the bar at the top fills up and you're granted a reprieve. While these missions do offer some variety, they're so bland and annoying the game would have been better served without them. There are a few other new features Riptide introduces. Much of the game now takes place in a jungle this time, and trucks will only get you so far. You'll spend the first few hours trawling the waterways in the game's new boats, which function exactly like trucks, and aren't even present in the second half of the game. There's also new water-themed enemies, the Drowners, which do nothing new and could easily be confused for regular enemies. Probably the only great new addition are the dead zones, quarantined areas that act like dungeons, spawning stronger enemies but offering higher end weapons and materials. The plot itself is once again nonsense. There's more nothing about how the plague was a setup before it just goes completely Resident Evil, talking about bioweapons and mercenaries. I honestly don't think I could name any of the characters without looking it up, not that it matters too much anyway. It does manage to culminate in some very annoying boss fights at least, but beyond that, it's not worth paying attention to. Beyond the main quest, there's also now the option to run errands for the people in your camp in order to upgrade them. Aside from increasing stock for your merchants though, there's very little reason to do this, and even when maxed out, they don't offer anything better than what you can just loot out in the wild. It does at least give all the random junk you pick up a bit of purpose, so it has that going for it. Speaking of weapons, there have been tweaks to how the upgrades work. All elemental effects now just offer a base damage instead of some weird chance mechanic the first game had. You can also now modify more weapon types, including specialized throwing weapons, and new melee weapons and guns have been added to the roster. Combat, when it works, does remain satisfying, and blessedly there's fewer encounters with humans throughout the game. Probably the biggest improvement over the original game are Riptide's levels. There's only 2 this time, not counting transitional areas like a ferry hub or, yes, more sewers. The first area is the aforementioned jungle, flooded and curving. It's a mixture of the resort and the jungle from the first game, though more open and easier to navigate this time. Then there's the city of Henderson, with big open areas, tight corridors, and plenty to explore. Both of these are miles better than whatever the first game had, and it was a lot more fun experiencing them in this game. Unfortunately, any issue with the first game is also here, sometimes much worse. Once again, everything was just incredibly buggy, and getting caught in the environment was a constant issue. There's a new jump attack that's an instant kill on most enemies that you can trigger if you're only a few inches higher than your target, so that was regularly abused. And AI for humans, be that enemies you face or now NPC partners, was so bad it made me question whether or not it was programmed or just inferred. As you may have noticed, there's also absolutely nothing in the way of visual improvements in Riptide. The new locations look nice enough, but if the first game was mediocre by 2011 standards, by 2013 this was downright ugly. This was up against some of the prettiest games of the 7th gen, titles like GTA 5, The Last of Us, or Metro Last Light. Horror should be ugly, sure, but by this point, Riptide was looking worse than its in-game monsters. Riptide isn't a disappointment because nobody had any expectations for it to begin with. It didn't have the marketing blitz of the first game, save for a brief controversy over the worst pre-order statue in the history of gaming. Riptide feels like it just doesn't exist, a half-forgotten anomaly only remembered by a few confused cretins unlucky enough to play it. And somehow, the series can get worse. Join me next time as we dive into the absolute darkest depths of the pit of this series.
We're all in the same boat here, and as far as I can tell, this son of a bitch is sinking.